Let's get right to Albert Breer, our friend from Sports Illustrated and the MMQB, right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Albert, I appreciate the time greatly. I'm sure your phone's buzzing like crazy. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
No, always, Bruce. You know that.
Okay, appreciate it. Let's get right into it. The Von Miller trade, I love it. That's the only way to put it. I love it. I love the aggressivity for the Rams to just keep on getting more and more pot committed. What can you tell us about it, Albert?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, they've always been aggressive, but I think over the last couple of years, what you've noticed is that they are really kind of putting all of their resources into, what they consider value positions, right? And so, before where I think, if they were just aggressive in trying to stock good players, now they've really focused it on a few spots. And, it's receivers, it's quarterbacks, it's corners, and it's pass rushers. And, we saw what they did with Stafford. We saw what they did with Ramsey. And, Vaughn's a little different because Vaughn doesn't have as much time left as Ramsey did when they traded for him, or as Stafford does now that they've traded for him, even though he's a little older. Obviously, there's a position difference there. But they've really kind of had a focus on, trying to put as much as they can in what they consider premium positions. And clearly, Von Miller was the best team on a Super Bowl champion 6 years ago. Now, is he the player that he was back then? Probably not. But, now he's going to be playing alongside Aaron Donald, alongside Leonard Floyd. He won't need to do quite as much. So, I think it's an awfully aggressive move. I think it kind of is along the lines of what they've done the last 2 or 3 years, how they've focused that on premium positions. And I think for Denver, if you're Vic Fangio, you don't feel great about this.
I know.
If you're Vic Fangio, you're saying, okay, now we're starting to, under a new general manager, under a first-year general manager, George Payton, we're starting to look towards 2022, and what does that mean for my future? So it's interesting from the Rams' perspective. Of course, they're all in, and I think a 7-1 start certainly, confirms the way that they felt about themselves going into the season. And the Broncos, of course, start 3-0, but the whole thing's kind of come undone on them since then, and that's why I think they're sort of turning their focus towards 2022 when, who knows, maybe they're the ones that are going big game hunting for a quarterback.
Well, look, they have to. That's for sure. And to see Von Miller go, right, and they get the draft capital, it strikes me as a maneuver that would count against them. And Aaron Rodgers saying, "I'll go there," right? You're trading away championship pieces, unless you get him back, unless you sign him back, you get the picks, and you kind of pull like what the Yankees did with Aroldis Chapman and the Cubs back in the day. Is that what
look at it this way, right? So you got Bradley Chubb, so they're going to have to pay him. Von Miller, I believe, I have to look this up because it's a lot happening at once. I think he's in a contract year. Mm-hmm. So maybe you had the idea he's not coming back, right? And maybe because you know more about him than anybody else, you're thinking to himself, this isn't going to be the same player in 2022. So let's get what we can now. We'll build more capital to go get a quarterback. And then say they do what the Rams did, right, which the Rams had Matthew Stafford in place at the end of January last year. Now you've cleared spots and you've got all of this draft capital, and if you go and trade for an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson or a Deshaun Watson at that point, now you can say, well, look, we're trading for you, and then on top of that, we've got more capital and more space to build around you with guys that are going to be here for the next few years, rather than having Von Miller on the roster. And, oh, by the way, now maybe we have the space to go take care of Bradley Chubb, who's going to be our new kind of, warhorse pass rush. So, I think it's sort of a chess move by George Payton in that we're going to have assets and we're going to have space to build in 2022. And not only can we bring in a quarterback, but on top of that, we're going to have the resources to build aggressively around that quarterback with a guy who's probably going to be here a little longer than Von Miller would have been.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. What's going on with Deshaun Watson as you and I are sitting here at 6 minutes after 1 Eastern time, the day before the deadline trade? What can you tell me?
Honestly, Rich, I don't think this thing was ever that close, and things can happen fast. So, but I've felt for the last couple of weeks that this was really 50-50. And, to me, there are really three people who are sort of helping to control this process. One is Deshaun Watson. Clearly, he wants out of there. Two is Cal Mayer. He wants Deshaun Watson out of town. And then three is Nick Caserio, who is sort of I would say the least emotionally attached party in this whole thing, right? And he's the one who's sort of the caretaker of what the next 5 to 10 years of the Houston Texans look like. And I think Nick has been, I just think very reasoned about this whole thing and thinking, I'm not going to deal away my most valuable asset. The asset, like what happens with Deshaun Watson, will in all likelihood go a long way towards painting how his tenure as a general manager looks in Houston over the next 5-10 years, however long he's there. And so if you're Nick, you can't afford to go get 50 cents on the dollar for him. And if it means waiting until February or March for there to be more clarity legally, for there to be more clarity from the league, and for there to be more suitors, right? Because you think at that point, who knows? Maybe the Browns are involved. I mean, we know the 4 teams that have been monitoring it are the Panthers, the Dolphins, the Broncos, and the Eagles. Well, maybe we get to March and April. Maybe the Browns are involved. Maybe the Seahawks are involved. Maybe the Giants are involved. And so you could have a much better market then. And oh, by the way, what do you lose by waiting till then? I mean, if you wait until then, I guess the downside would be he's in your building, but you've already, I would argue, weathered the storm when it comes to that because he's been in the building for 3 months without playing. And any picks that you get back, you can't use till April anyway. So, I think Nick Caserio's put the thing right in that, he's just sort of saying to other teams, and I guess the bet would be that the legal situation is not going to get worse. That would be the one area where there's some risk. But, if you're Nick Caserio now, I think the best thing to do is to wait for the market to sort of rebound for Deshaun Watson. And I think there's a better chance of that happening by waiting than by just, doing something out of panic right now, unless, again, somebody on the other side of the table panics and offers full price for him.
All right. Now, obviously, Seattle gets thrown in there if Russ and they divorce and, other teams. Browns, that's a new one for me, I'll be honest. And I know that they've got to make a decision on Baker Mayfield. And Dak money would be something that even somebody who's been caping for Baker, would have an issue paying him. Like literally, right. If that's the sort of stance he's taken with the Cleveland Browns in some, in a long-term conversation, I'd be like, we need to reconfigure our relationship. Is that possible? Yeah. Are you serious that the Browns would? Is that?
I mean, just think about it this way, okay? Like, what was the B-level quarterback contract? I mean, it just never really existed. It's just like if you look at the quarterbacks, there's like the franchise type quarterbacks who are all at one point, like right at the top of the market, right? At one point it was 30, then it was 35, and now it's in the 40s, right? So there's that category of quarterback. And then there's like this precipitous fall to like guys making like $8, $9, $10 million a year. You know what I mean? So there's no real like B-level quarterback contract. And so, I think that's sort of how, over the years, it's evolved where it's either a yes or a no question, right? Like either you think the guy's a franchise guy or you don't. And, like when teams have sort of dragged it out in the past, like the Buccaneers did with Jameis Winston, like the Titans did with Marcus Mariota, almost uniformly it leads to divorce. So I think that's sort of where the Browns and Baker are now, where the Browns have to answer that yes or no question, and I think they go one of two ways. Like I think they either go all in and Baker gets them to the playoffs and they're, all right, we're going to pay him, and maybe it's not what Josh Allen got, but it's in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Or they do what the Rams or the Niners did last year, where they look at their quarterback and they say, it's a really good, but we need to be better. If we're going to pay full price for a franchise quarterback, we do it with a guy that we think is elite. And, it's a conversation, again, that the Niners had last year in January, in February. It's the conversation the Rams had in January, where those teams looked at it. And those teams, remember, those teams both, the Niners and the Rams, both had quarterbacks in their 20s who had taken them to the Super Bowl, who had multiple years left on their contracts, and they moved off of those guys because they didn't think it was good enough. And so I think either the Browns decide to pay Baker, with a full franchise level contract, or, I think this thing is maybe hurtling towards where, the Rams and the Niners were with Goff and Garoppolo a year ago.
Albert Breer, a few more minutes left with the senior NFL reporter, the MMQB of Sports Illustrated, here on the Rich Eisen Show. As we're talking right now, Mike Vrabel is announcing to the media that Derrick Henry will indeed have surgery on his broken foot, suffered in the season, in my mind, AFC South ceiling win for the Titans in Week 8, and that no timetable for his return. What do you think their next step is, figuratively, with their guy on the shelf, their best player on the shelf? What do you got for me?
It's hard. I mean, I think they, I think my old colleague, your colleague at NFL Network, I think Ian reported that, they're going to kick the tires on Adrian Peterson, and I would think that they're going to, look at some guys, and there are some players that have been, sort of shopped around for trade. You certainly could call Seattle about somebody like Rashad Penny, Marlon Mack, who's fallen behind Jonathan Taylor, obviously, in the pecking order. In Indianapolis would be another name that's been floating around there for the last couple of weeks. But there's no replacing Derrick Henry. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I can't think of a quarterback. I can't think of a non-quarterback who means more to his team than Derrick Henry means to the Titans.
Well, Kamara might be the only guy that approaches that level. But I hear you. That is just an absolute crusher of an injury. There's really not much more to say other than the fact that is an MVP candidate that just
And here's
had
the
a
thing,
season.
too, Rich. Like, if you think about this too, like the other part of it is like now, Ryan Tannehill has to make his money, right? Like you paid Ryan Tannehill $33 million a year. Ryan Tannehill has to make his money. Like A.J. Brown, like let's see if you're a number one receiver now. They're going to have to pay him. Let's see, what you've got. Obviously Julio Jones, they trade for him in the off season. Can he raise his level of play? The defense, and the defense maligned over the last couple of years, but has made some big plays the last couple of weeks. We've seen it with Kevin Byard, making huge plays against the Chiefs and then yesterday against the Colts. So, I know one thing about that team, for all the flaws, and they've had flaws since Mike Vrabel's gotten there. That is a tough team. It's a resilient team. And they really play with identity. And that's going to be the question to me is, like, when your identity has been so centered on one guy and, the tough, rugged Tennessee Titans, like Derrick Henry embodied that. Can you do that by committee? I think that's really going to be the question going forward, because I don't doubt the resilience of that group. We've seen it the last few years. But, this is the sort of blow that sort of, I think, kind of gets back to chipping away at the identity of who they've been.
And then lastly for you, Albert Breer, what is the Saints' plan, do you think, with Jameis being out? Do they stick with Trevor Siemian, who looked terrific in just the first blush, middle of the game, adrenaline rushing, role, but, week in, week out? This is a Saints team. If they beat the Falcons this week, they're in first place because the Bucs are on a bye week. They'd have the same record, and obviously they've already beaten Tampa. So this is huge. Taysom Hill has been in concussion protocol. Do they go with him? Do they actually pick up a free agent like Cam Newton? Would that be something that they'd be into? Because that might actually
pick up the phone.
I don't know.
They've been aggressive like the Rams the last few years. Do they pick up the phone and call Houston? You know what I mean? Like, if you really want to get wild with it, maybe you do something like that, or like call Drew Brees, call Phillip Rivers. I think this is going to be interesting because I think one thing that Sean Payton hasn't gotten enough credit for is how he sort of managed the kind of the twilight of Drew Brees' career and how they built a team around Drew Brees that I think was rock solid, and they didn't get enough credit for that. But if you look at it, over the last 3 years, 19, 20, and 21, Sean Payton and the Saints are 13-3 without Drew Brees as their quarterback, which is an amazing number, right? And so I think absent going and bringing somebody in, I do think that they're going to explore bringing somebody else in. I was talking to a couple of guys last night, and I wouldn't rule anything out. I think that there's a possibility, and this is going to sound crazy, that we see like almost like a quarterback shuttle with Simeon and Taysom Hill when he comes back from his concussion, both having roles. And I know that sort of sounds antithetical to the way that NFL philosophy has been forever and ever. But if there's someone who's willing to buck that trend and go with like a quarterback shuttle and do something creative because, they're lacking a little bit at the receiver position and they need to do things to create like an offensive threat, I think Sean Payton's that guy, right? Like, so, I think they will kick tires on guys on the outside and they will take a look at guys on the outside. But I wouldn't be surprised if they do decide to stick with the guys in the roster, if we see just sort of a creative sort of platoon where, Taysom Hill's got a big role, but it's more of like sort of a slash like Cordell Stewart back in the day role with Trevor Siemian having his own role as well.
Well, I mean, what would mimic Taysom Hill's playbook better than Cam Newton, right? I mean, he's sitting at home. He's vaxxed, right? I mean, he's ready to go.
I mean, God, and it's interesting, too, because, obviously, Sean Payton was in the division with Cam Newton for a long time. And, I think if there's anybody who would know creatively how to pump life into his career, I mean, look at I just think, that stat that I gave you, right? I just think it's the most staggering thing that he's 13-3 without Drew Brees the last 3 years. It's amazing how quarterback-centric the league's gotten. And it's not with, the same backup either. It's with Teddy Bridgewater, it's with Jameis Winston, it's with Taysom Hill. They've done it with so many different guys. It would be fascinating to see what would happen if he brought Cam Newton in and could find a way to pump life back into his career. Because we saw him do it with Teddy Bridgewater, right, who was coming off of, just a catastrophic injury. We've seen him do it with Jameis Winston. I don't know if they're going to do it, but it would be certainly fascinating to see what he could do with Cam based on how far it seemed like Cam had fallen last year.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, Albert. It's only been 3 weeks. It was 3 weeks ago tonight that Jon Gruden resigned, and that feels like now 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my last one for you. Anybody check in on him? What's his next move? Based on the owners' meeting, you were there. I'm sure you heard a lot of chatter about it. So what do you think Gruden's next move is here?
I've talked to a couple people around him over the last week, and the feedback I've got is he's doing okay. It's obviously devastating. Effectively his career's over. So I don't know whether or not he's going to sue the league. But it certainly felt like, last time I checked, at least like all things are on the table now. And this thing's got potential to get ugly, Rich, because, the leaking of those emails, we have a lot of finger pointing internally in the league. And, at that owners meeting last week in New York, Roger Goodell got up there and he told the group, said, I can't say for sure what everybody did, but I can tell you for certain, nobody that I know of leaked those emails. Nobody inside 345 Park. And then later in the day, Tanya Snyder, Dan Snyder's wife, got up and swore up and down that the Snyder family had nothing to do with leaking those emails. So there's certainly been a lot of questions about how that happened. And, one way we might find out is if somebody like Jon Gruden decides that it's time to file a lawsuit. So it'll be interesting to see what he does, because if he does decide to go that route, that could wind up, I guess, opening a lot of clauses with some skeletons in them over the next few months.
Albert, appreciate the time. Boy, everything you just said, it's remarkable. All that's going on in the NFL. So much of it could be dated 5 minutes from now. That's how fluid this situation is. It's unbelievable.
Keep your eyes on Houston. We got till 4:00 tomorrow, right?
Okay. Thanks for the call, Albert. You be well. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Rich.
Albert Breer, everybody from the MMQB. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.